The wind howled like a wounded beast through the Montana Territory that December night of 1889, driving sheets of snow against the weathered logs of Daniel Brooks's cabin. Inside, the 34-year-old cowboy sat close to his stone fireplace, working a piece of leather with practiced hands. The storm had caught him unprepared, forcing him to bring his small herd closer to the homestead before the worst of it hit. Daniel paused in his work, listening to the timbers creak under the assault of wind and ice. He'd weathered many such storms in his 12 years on this land, each one a test of will between man and nature. His calloused fingers resumed their task, mending a broken bridle by the flickering light of the fire. The cabin, though modest, was solid, built with his own hands from pine and cottonwood, chinked tight against the elements. A sharp crack echoed through the night, followed by the crash of a falling branch somewhere near the barn. Daniel rose from his chair, reaching for the Winchester propped against the wall. Living alone this far from town meant staying vigilant, even in weather that would keep most folks huddled by their fires. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, faint but unmistakable. Knocking. 3 weak raps against his door, barely audible above the wind's fury. Daniel froze. No one with good intentions would be out in this blizzard. His nearest neighbor, old Tom Garrett, lived 3 miles east, and even that fool wouldn't venture out tonight. He approached the door cautiously. Rifle in hand, the knocking came again, weaker this time. "Who's there?" Daniel called out, his voice rough from disuse. Days could pass without him speaking to another soul. No answer came, just another feeble knock, against his better judgment. Daniel lifted the heavy wooden bar and cracked open the door. The wind immediately tried to tear it from his grasp, sending a blast of snow into the cabin. But what he saw made him forget the cold entirely. A woman stood on his threshold, or rather, swayed there, barely upright. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair, which had come loose from its pins and hung in frozen strands around her face. Her traveling dress, once a deep blue wool, was soaked through and rigid with frost. She clutched a small carpet bag with fingers so pale they looked like porcelain. "Please," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Please help me." Without thinking, Daniel dropped his rifle and caught her as she collapsed forward. She weighed hardly anything, like a bird made of ice and cloth. He pulled her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, half carrying, half dragging her to the fire. Her skin felt cold as river stones through her wet clothes. Daniel laid her on the rag rug before the hearth, then quickly added more wood to the flames. The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were green, he noticed, green as spring grass, before closing again. Her whole body shook with violent tremors. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" He knelt beside her, unsure what to do. In all his years of tending sick cattle and injured horses, he'd never had to care for a half-frozen woman. She nodded weakly, teeth chattering so hard he feared they might break. "We need to get you warm," Daniel said, already moving. He grabbed every blanket he owned from his narrow bed in the corner, then hesitated. Her dress was soaked through, the fabric stiff with ice. She'd never warm up in those wet clothes. "Ma'am, He cleared his throat. "Your dress. It's got to come off or you'll catch your death." Her eyes opened wider, alarm flickering across her features. "I'll turn my back," he said quickly. "Wrap yourself in these blankets. There's a shirt of mine there, too. It's clean. I promise I won't look." For a moment, he thought she might refuse. Then she gave the slightest nod. Daniel turned to face the wall, studying the rough-hewn logs with intense concentration while he listened to the rustle of wet fabric and chattering teeth behind him. He counted the knots in the wood, traced the grain patterns with his eyes. Anything to give the poor woman privacy in her desperate state. I'm decent," came a weak voice after what felt like hours. He turned to find her huddled in his blankets, his flannel shirt visible at the collar. Her dress lay in a sodden heap beside her. Color was already returning to her cheeks, though she still shivered. Daniel busied himself making coffee, strong and black. then ladled out a bowl of the stew that had been simmering since morning. "Can you hold this?" He offered her the tin cup first. Her hands shook as she reached for it, and he had to steady the cup as she brought it to her lips. She sighed as the warmth hit her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. I was sure I would die out there." "What in blazes were you doing out in this storm?" The question came out harsher than he intended. Fresh tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them back. "I had nowhere else to go." Daniel fetched the stew and a spoon, settling himself on the floor at a respectful distance. "Eat first. Then, if you're willing, you can tell me what happened." She ate slowly, mechanically, as if remembering how to perform the simple act. Daniel noticed her hands, soft, uncalloused. City hands, the kind that had never milked a cow or mended a fence. A gold band glinted on her left finger. When she'd finished half the bowl, she set it aside and pulled the blankets tighter. "My name is Clara," she said. "Clara Whitmore. Though I suppose that doesn't matter now." "Daniel Brooks," he offered. "This is my place." Clara nodded, staring into the fire. "I came from Philadelphia. I was a mail-order bride." The words seemed to pain her. "I answered an advertisement from a rancher named Henry Callahan. He promised—" She laughed bitterly. "Well, it doesn't matter what he promised." Daniel knew Henry Callahan, owned one of the largest spreads in the territory. More cattle than he could count. Also knew him for a hard man, quick with his fists and quicker with harsh words. "I arrived in Milltown this morning on the stage," Clara continued. "Mr. Callahan met me at the station. He took one look at me and—" Her voice broke. "He said I wasn't what he expected. Too thin, too weak, too Eastern. He brought me as far as the fork in the road, then told me to find my own way back to town. In this storm," Daniel couldn't hide his disgust. "It wasn't snowing then, just starting. He said I could make it if I hurried. Then he left me there with my bag and rode off." She looked up at him, and the pain in her eyes made his chest tighten. "I tried to walk back, but the snow came so fast, and I couldn't see the road. I saw your light, and you did right," Daniel said firmly. "Any man who'd leave a woman in weather like this ain't worth spit." Clara fumbled with something at her neck, pulling out a crumpled envelope. "He left this too. Said it explained everything." Daniel took the letter, reading by firelight. The words were cold, businesslike. Henry Callahan hereby dissolved any understanding between himself and Miss Clara Whitmore, citing misrepresentation of her person and unsuitability for ranch life. $10 was enclosed for her return passage. $10, Clara said with that bitter laugh again. "As if I could buy my dignity back for $10. Daniel crumpled the letter and tossed it into the fire. They watched it burn in silence. "You can stay here tonight," he said finally. "Storm should blow itself out by morning. Then I'll take you to town myself. I have no money for lodging in town. That $10 is all I have in the world. We'll figure something out." Daniel stood, suddenly aware of how small his cabin was with 2 people in it. "You take the bed. I'll bunk here by the fire." "I couldn't." "You could and you will," he said firmly. "You've been through enough today," as he helped her to her feet, still wrapped in blankets. Their eyes met properly for the first time. Despite everything, the cold, the abandonment, the uncertain future, he saw strength there. This wasn't some fragile flower who'd wilt at the first sign of hardship. She'd walked through a blizzard when another might have given up. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks," Clara said softly. "I won't forget your kindness. Just being neighborly," he mumbled, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Later, as he lay on the floor listening to the storm rage outside and her quiet breathing from his bed, Daniel found himself thinking about Henry Callahan. The man had ordered a bride like he'd order cattle, then discarded her just as easily when she didn't meet his specifications. It burned in his gut, that callousness. Come morning, he'd take her to town as promised, find her decent lodging, maybe help her find work until she could afford passage home. It was the right thing to do. But as the wind howled and the fire crackled, Daniel Brooks couldn't shake the feeling that this storm had blown something into his life that would change it forever. He just didn't know yet whether that change would be for good or ill. The last thing he remembered before sleep took him was the sound of her voice. Soft, but determined. "I won't forget your kindness." Somehow, he believed her. The morning light filtered through frost-covered windows, casting pale shadows across the cabin floor. Daniel woke stiff from his night by the hearth, his back protesting the hard planks. The storm had quieted to a whisper, though snow still fell in lazy spirals outside. Clara sat at his rough-hewn table, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the tin cup between her hands. She'd dressed in her own clothes again, the blue wool dress now dry but wrinkled beyond repair. Her dark hair was pinned up properly, though a few strands escaped to frame her face. "Morning," Daniel said, stretching the kinks from his spine. "Coffee's still warm if you want more." She looked up, offering a wan smile. "I've had 3 cups already. I hope you don't mind. I couldn't seem to get warm enough. Help yourself to whatever you need." He moved to the stove, adding wood to coax the fire back to life. "Storm's letting up. Should be able to get you to town by noon." Clara's fingers tightened around the cup. "Mr. Brooks, I need to tell you something. About why I came west. About Henry Callahan." Daniel poured himself coffee and sat across from her, waiting. In the morning light, he could see details he'd missed the night before. The faint lines around her eyes that spoke of worry, the determined set of her jaw, the way she held herself with careful dignity despite everything. "I wasn't entirely honest last night," she began. "I mean, everything I told you was true, but I didn't tell you all of it." She took a breath. "I'm not some romantic fool who answered an advertisement on a whim. I had no choice. Most folks who come west are running from something," Daniel said carefully. Clara nodded. "My father owned a small shipping company in Philadelphia. When he died 2 years ago, I discovered he'd been borrowing heavily to keep it afloat. The creditors took everything, our house, the business, even Mother's jewelry." Her voice grew quieter. "My mother passed shortly after. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think she died of shame." Daniel remained silent, letting her tell it at her own pace. "I tried to find work, but respectable positions for women are scarce, and they pay barely enough to eat. My landlady showed me Mr. Callahan's advertisement. She said mail-order brides could make good lives out west, that ranchers needed wives and weren't particular about backgrounds." Clara laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I should have known when his letters seemed too good to be true. What did he promise you? A home, respectability, children, eventually." She met his eyes. "I wasn't looking for love. Mr. Brooks, I'm 26 years old, well past the age when girls dream of romance. I just wanted somewhere to belong again." Daniel felt anger kindle in his chest, not at her, but at the situation that had driven her to such desperation. What exactly did Callahan write in those letters? Clara reached into her bag and withdrew a small bundle tied with string. "I kept them all. Proof of our agreement. I thought—" She untied the bundle, selecting one letter. "Here, this is from just last month." Daniel read aloud. "My dear Miss Whitmore, your latest letter filled me with great anticipation for your arrival. The ranch house awaits your feminine touch, and I have already begun preparations for our wedding. The minister in Milltown has been notified. You will want for nothing as my wife. I assure you, yours in earnest expectation, Henry Callahan." He painted such a picture, Clara said softly. A big house with real glass windows, a flower garden, neighbors to visit. I practiced cooking hearty meals, learned to mend heavier fabrics. I sold everything I owned to buy this dress and my travel fare. She gestured to her worn wool dress. "I thought it would be sturdy enough for ranch life." "It is," Daniel said. "Callahan's a fool. When he met me at the stage," Clara's voice wavered. "He looked me up and down like I was livestock at auction, said I was too skinny, that I'd never survive a Montana winter, said my hands were too soft for real work. Then he laughed, actually laughed, and said he'd ordered a wife. not a parlor ornament. Daniel's fists clenched under the table. He'd never liked Henry Callahan, but this went beyond mere dislike. He brought me in his wagon as far as the crossroads. Clara continued. Said Milltown was just 5 miles back the way we'd come, that a walk would do me good. Might toughen me up for the next rancher fool enough to take me. Her composure finally cracked. He threw my bag in the mud and left me there. Didn't even look back. That son of a... Daniel bit off the curse. Pardon my language, ma'am. I've heard worse, Clara said with a weak smile. I started walking, but the snow came so fast, I couldn't see the road anymore. I kept thinking about those stories of people freezing to death just yards from shelter. Then I saw your light. They sat in silence for a moment. The only sound the pop of wood in the stove and the wind sighing around the eaves. What will you do now? Daniel asked finally. I don't know. Clara looked down at her hands. I can't go back to Philadelphia. There's nothing there for me. I have $10, the clothes I'm wearing, and whatever's in that bag. Not enough for stage fare east, barely enough for a week's lodging. You could find work in town. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house might need help, or Mr. Brooks. Clara interrupted gently. I appreciate your optimism, but we both know what kind of work is available for desperate women in frontier towns. I may be naive about some things, but not about that. Daniel felt heat rise in his face. She was right, of course. Milltown wasn't exactly overflowing with respectable employment for unmarried women. There must be something, he insisted. Maybe the school needs a teacher, or I'll figure it out, Clara said with forced brightness. I've survived this long. I'm sure something will present itself. But Daniel heard the doubt beneath her words. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the world lay buried under white, pristine and unforgiving. His own struggles seemed small compared to hers. At least he had this land, these walls, a purpose. Callahan specify anywhere in that letter why he changed his mind? Daniel asked suddenly. Clara looked puzzled. Just what he said at the crossroads, that I wasn't what he ordered. Did he see you before yesterday? Did you send a photograph? No. He said he didn't need one, said he trusted my description. Her eyes widened in understanding. You think he had another reason? Daniel turned from the window. I know Henry Callahan. He's got a mean streak wide as the Missouri, but he's also practical. He wouldn't throw away a mail-order bride just because she's slender. Not after paying for her passage. Then why? Can't say for certain. Daniel chose his words carefully. But Callahan's been trying to buy up land all through the valley. Maybe having a wife would complicate things. Or maybe... He hesitated. Maybe what? Maybe someone made him a better offer. A rancher's daughter with land of her own? Perhaps. Wouldn't be the first time a man broke an engagement for profit. Clara stared at the letters spread on the table. So I was just... inconvenient. That'd be my guess. She gathered the letters slowly, retying them with trembling fingers. It doesn't matter why. The result is the same. I'm stranded in Montana territory with nothing and no one. That's not entirely true, Daniel said before he could stop himself. Clara looked up sharply. What do you mean? He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly aware he was walking onto dangerous ground. I mean, you're not alone right at this moment, and Milltown's not such a bad place. Folks might surprise you. Like you did? Clara asked softly. Taking in a stranger in a storm. Just being neighborly. Daniel mumbled. The same words as last night, but they felt different now, heavier with meaning. Clara stood, folding the blanket carefully. I should prepare to leave. I've imposed on your hospitality enough. No imposition, Daniel said quickly. And there's no rush. Snow's still falling. Mr. Brooks. Clara faced him squarely. You've been unbelievably kind, but we both know I can't stay here. People would talk. Your reputation. I don't give a damn about... He stopped, took a breath. Pardon. I don't much care what people say about me. But you're right. Your reputation matters. What's left of it? Clara said wryly. "A failed mail-order bride who spent the night unchaperoned in a bachelor's cabin. I'm sure that will do wonders for my employment prospects." The bitterness in her voice struck him like a physical blow. She was right again. The proper folks in town would whisper, would judge. It wasn't fair. But fairness had little to do with how the world worked. "We'll think of something," Daniel said firmly. "Maybe Mrs. Patterson won't care about gossip if you can cook and clean. Or Doc Morrison might need help. His wife's been poorly." Clara managed a genuine smile. "You're a good man. Mr. Brooks. Don't let anyone tell you different." As she turned to gather her few belongings, Daniel found himself memorizing details. The way morning light caught in her dark hair, the graceful way she moved despite everything she'd endured, the quiet strength that radiated from her small frame. He'd take her to town as promised, find her safe lodging, help her get situated. It was the right thing to do, but standing in his small cabin, watching her carefully fold that wet, wrinkled dress, Daniel Brooks felt something shift inside his chest. He'd lived alone for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to want to protect someone, to rage against the injustices they'd suffered, to wish he could make their world right again. It was a dangerous feeling for a man who'd built his life on self-sufficiency and solitude. And yet, as Clara turned back to him with that brave, broken smile, Daniel knew he was already lost. The storm raged for 3 more days, trapping them in the cabin like castaways on a wooden island. By the second morning, Daniel had stopped suggesting they attempt the journey to town. The snow piled high against the windows, and the wind howled with renewed fury each time it seemed to calm. "I'll pay you back for the food," Clara said on that second morning, watching him prepare breakfast. "Once I find work, I'll repay every penny." "No need for that," Daniel replied, slicing thick pieces of bacon. "Can't eat money, and I've got plenty of supplies laid in." She insisted on helping, despite his protests. Soon they fell into a rhythm, Clara cooking while Daniel tended the animals in the barn, fighting through drifts to ensure his horses and milk cows survived the storm. When he returned, cheeks red from cold, she'd have coffee waiting and something warm on the stove. "You're a fine cook," Daniel commented that evening, finishing his second helping of biscuits and gravy. "My mother taught me," Clara said, a distant look in her eyes. "She said a woman should know how to make something from nothing. I just never thought I'd need the skill quite this literally." They spent the long hours talking, carefully at first, then with growing ease. Daniel learned she could read and write with a fine hand, had studied mathematics and geography, could speak a little French. Clara discovered he'd taught himself to read from his mother's Bible and a few worn almanacs, that he'd built his cabin with help from a traveling carpenter, that he'd once driven cattle all the way to Kansas City. "Why did you stay out here alone?" Clara asked on the third night, mending a tear in his work shirt by lamplight. "Most men would have taken a wife by now, had a family." Daniel poked at the fire, considering his answer. "Tried courting once. Sarah Jennings, the banker's daughter. She came to a barn dance with me, took one look at this place, and said she'd rather die an old maid than live in a shack." "This isn't a shack," Clara said indignantly. "It's well built and clean. You've made it comfortable." "You're being kind." "I'm being honest." She set down her sewing. "I've lived in a Philadelphia mansion, Mr. Brooks, and I've lived in a tenement room with rats in the walls. This cabin is neither. It's a home, simple, yes, but warm and safe and cared for." Sarah Jennings was a fool. Daniel felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "Well, she married a merchant from Denver, so I guess she got what she wanted." "And what did you want?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Daniel met her green eyes across the small space. Someone who could see past the rough edges. Someone who understood that life out here is hard but worthwhile. Someone. He stopped, afraid he'd already said too much. "Someone real," Clara finished softly. "Yes," he admitted. "Someone real." They worked together during those storm-bound days with surprising harmony. Clara proved herself far more capable than her soft hands suggested. She learned to keep the fire banked properly, to strain the milk and store it in the cold pantry, to patch clothes with tiny, precise stitches. When Daniel came in half-frozen from checking trap lines, she'd have hot water ready for washing and wouldn't fuss when he dripped snow across her freshly swept floor. "You adapt quickly," he observed, watching her knead bread dough with growing confidence. "Necessity is a stern teacher." Clara replied, "Besides, this is what I thought I'd be doing as a rancher's wife. Might as well learn properly." For his part, Daniel found himself looking forward to coming inside, to sharing meals with conversation instead of silence. Clara had a quick wit and wasn't afraid to tease him when he grew too serious. She laughed at his stories about ornery cattle and shared her own about Philadelphia society's ridiculous customs. "You really wore a bustle?" he asked, incredulous. "Like carrying a shelf attached to your backside." Clara confirmed, laughing. "I sold mine to buy the train ticket. The shopkeeper looked at me like I was mad, trading fashion for freedom. Seems like a good trade to me." "It was," she said quietly. "Even ending up here, even with everything that's happened, I don't regret leaving." On the fourth morning, Daniel woke to silence. The wind had finally died, and weak sunlight filtered through the frost-covered windows. He found Clara already up, standing at the window in his borrowed shirt and her mended skirt, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I've never seen anything like it." Daniel moved to stand beside her, careful to keep proper distance. "Wait until spring. Whole valley turns green, and the wild flowers bloom so thick you can smell them a mile off." "I wish I could see that," Clara said wistfully, then seemed to catch herself. "But of course, I'll be long gone by then." "Once the road's clear—" "Right," Daniel said, the word tasting like ash. "Town." They stood in silence, watching the world wake up under its blanket of white. Daniel was acutely aware of her presence, the way the morning light caught in her hair, the small sigh that escaped her lips. "I should make breakfast," Clara said finally, turning from the window, but she moved too quickly. Bumping into him in the small space, he caught her arms to steady her, and suddenly they were standing far too close, her hands pressed against his chest, his fingers gentle on her elbows. "Clara," he said, her given name slipping out unbidden. She looked up at him, green eyes wide, and for a moment the world held its breath. Then she stepped back, color high in her cheeks. "I'm sorry, "No need for apologies," Daniel said quickly, his own face burning. "Close quarters is all." But something had shifted between them. Some invisible line crossed. The easy companionship of the past days now hummed with awareness. Daniel found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, the curve of her neck as she bent over her sewing, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, how she absently tucked loose strands of hair behind her ear. Clara seemed equally affected, starting when their hands accidentally touched passing dishes, blushing when he complimented her cooking, finding reasons to be across the room when he came too near. That evening, as they sat by the fire, she with her mending, he cleaning his rifle, Clara broke the charged silence. "My parents met at a church social," she said suddenly. "Mother was serving lemonade, and Father spilled it all over her best dress. She was furious until he offered to walk her home so she could change." They were married 6 months later. "Quick courtship," Daniel observed, carefully oiling the rifle's mechanism. "Mother said when you know, you know." Clara's needle paused. "I used to think that was romantic nonsense. Now?" "Now?" She shook her head. "Nothing, just woolly thoughts from being cooped up too long." But Daniel heard what she didn't say, felt it in the weight of the silence that followed. He thought of Sarah Jennings, who'd looked at his life and found it wanting. Then he looked at Clara, who'd lost everything and still found beauty in a sunrise, who worked without complaint and laughed at his poor jokes, who made his simple cabin feel like more than just shelter. When you know, you know. The thought terrified him. He'd known this woman less than a week, She was stranded, vulnerable, dependent on his kindness. Any feelings growing between them were likely born of proximity and circumstance. Nothing more. When the snow cleared and she went to town, found work and stability, she'd forget the rough cowboy who'd taken her in from the storm. "I should check the animals," Daniel said abruptly, setting aside the rifle. "In the dark?" Clara looked up, surprised. "Moon's bright enough." He grabbed his coat, needing distance, needing cold air to clear his head. Won't be long. Outside, the night was crystalline. Stars scattered like spilled salt across the black sky. His breath clouded in the frigid air as he crunched through snow to the barn. The horses nickered softly in greeting, and he spent longer than necessary checking their feed and water, trying to sort through the tangle of his thoughts. When he finally returned to the cabin, Clara had banked the fire and tidied the main room. A plate covered with a cloth sat warming on the stove. She'd saved his dinner. "Thank you," he said gruffly, touched by the simple gesture. "It's nothing," Clara replied from where she sat at the table, writing in what looked like a small journal. "Least I can do after all your kindness." "You don't owe me anything," Daniel said firmly. "Done nothing any decent man wouldn't do." Clara set down her pen and looked at him directly. "That's where you're wrong. Mr. Brooks, Henry Callahan proved that decent men are rarer than gold in these parts. You could have turned me away, could have taken advantage, could have been cruel." Her voice softened. "Instead, you've been nothing but good. That's not nothing. That's everything." Daniel stood frozen, plate in hand, unable to form words around the lump in his throat. Clara rose, color high in her cheeks. "I should retire. Good night, Mr. Brooks." "Daniel," he said suddenly. "Just call me Daniel." She paused at the doorway to the bedroom. "Good night, Daniel." The way she said his name, soft, almost tender, stayed with him long after she'd closed the door. He ate mechanically, barely tasting the food, his mind turning over the past days like a man examining treasure he couldn't quite believe was real. Tomorrow, if the weather held, he'd have to take her to town as promised. The thought sat like lead in his stomach. But what else could he do? She deserved better than exile in a remote cabin with a tongue-tied cowboy. She deserved choices, opportunities, a real future. Daniel cleaned his plate and prepared his bedroll by the dying fire, same as every night since she'd arrived. But tonight, sleep eluded him. Instead, he lay awake imagining spring wildflowers and green valleys and wondered if a man could be fool enough to fall in love in just 4 days. The answer, he feared, was yes. The sound of approaching horses broke the morning quiet 2 days later. Daniel looked up from splitting firewood to see 3 riders approaching through the snow. Henry Callahan's massive frame, unmistakable even at a distance, flanked by Sheriff Wade Thompson and one of Callahan's ranch hands. "Clara," Daniel called, setting down his axe. "Stay inside." She appeared at the doorway, face paling as she recognized the lead rider. "It's him. I'll handle this." Daniel moved to stand between her and the approaching men, hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. Callahan reined up 20 feet from the cabin, his heavy features set in a scowl. The sheriff, a fair-minded man Daniel had always respected, looked uncomfortable. "Brooks," Callahan said without preamble, "I hear you've got my property." "Don't see any property of yours here," Daniel replied evenly. "The woman, my bride, she's mine by rights. I paid her passage." Clara stepped out onto the porch despite Daniel's warning, chin raised. "I am no man's property. Mr. Callahan, you made that quite clear when you abandoned me in a blizzard." Callahan's face darkened. "Now see here, girl. We had an agreement, legal and binding. You can't just—" "You dissolved that agreement," Clara interrupted, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled. "In writing? Or have you forgotten the letter you left me with?" "That was a misunderstanding," Callahan blustered. "Heat of the moment. I've reconsidered." Daniel laughed, short and harsh. "Reconsidered? After leaving her to freeze to death?" Sheriff Thompson shifted in his saddle. Henry says Miss Whitmore is his legal bride. Daniel says they need to sort this out proper. There's nothing to sort out. Clara said firmly, Mr. Callahan rejected me, abandoned me, and severed our agreement. I owe him nothing. You owe me the price of your passage. Callahan snarled. $300, plus expenses. You'll work it off one way or another. The threat in his voice made Daniel step forward. That's enough. Callahan, lady said she's not going with you. That's the end of it. This ain't your business. Brooks, stand aside. I'm making it my business. The two men stared at each other, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Callahan's hand drifted toward his sidearm, but the sheriff intervened. Now hold on, both of you. Thompson dismounted, hands raised peacefully. Let's discuss this civilized like Miss Whitmore. Do you have this letter Henry mentioned? Clara disappeared inside, returning with the crumpled paper. The sheriff read it, eyebrows rising. Seems pretty clear. Henry, Thompson said slowly, says here you're dissolving the agreement. Even gave her money for return passage. I was hasty, Callahan ground out. A man can change his mind, not after abandoning a woman in a blizzard. The sheriff replied, That's attempted murder in some folks' books. I didn't abandon her. I told her the way to town, in a storm, with the night coming on. Daniel interjected. 5 miles through unfamiliar country. She'd have died if she hadn't found my place? Sheriff Thompson looked between them all, then focused on Clara. Miss Whitmore, what do you want to do? Law's murky here, but I'm inclined to side with you, given the circumstances. I want nothing to do with Mr. Callahan, Clara said clearly. I consider our business concluded. You little... Callahan spurred his horse forward, but Daniel was already moving. He grabbed the horse's bridle, using the animal's momentum to pull Callahan off balance. Touch her and I'll kill you, Daniel said quietly, meaning every word. Callahan's face went purple. You dare threaten me? I own half this valley. Not this half, Daniel replied. Now get off my land. Sheriff, arrest this man. He's harboring my bride. Thompson sighed deeply. Henry, I've heard enough. The lady's made her position clear, and frankly, you're lucky she's not pressing charges for abandonment. I suggest you head home and forget this whole mess. This isn't over, Callahan snarled, jerking his horse's head around. You think you can keep her? Brooks, a worthless saddle tramp playing hero? She'll see through you soon enough, see what you really are, nothing but dirt and sweat and broken dreams. And when she does, when she comes crawling to town begging for work, I'll be waiting. He spurred his horse viciously, his ranch hand following. Sheriff Thompson lingered, tipping his hat to Clara. Ma'am, I'm sorry for the trouble. If Henry bothers you again, you let me know. He looked at Daniel. You too, Dan. Keep your eyes open. Henry's not one to let grudges go. After they left, Clara sank onto the porch step, shaking. Daniel sat beside her, careful not to touch. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've brought trouble to your door. Not your doing, Daniel said firmly. Callahan's been a bully since we were boys. About time someone stood up to him. What he said... Clara looked at him sideways. About you being a worthless saddle tramp. That was cruel. Daniel shrugged. Heard worse. And there's truth in it. I don't have much. This cabin, some cattle, a piece of land. Not what a lady like you deserves. Stop. Clara turned to face him fully. You're worth 10 of Henry Callahan, 100. Money doesn't make a man. Daniel, character does. And you... She paused, color rising in her cheeks. You have more character in your little finger than he has in his whole body. They sat in silence, the morning sun warming the porch boards. Daniel was acutely aware of her presence, the fierce loyalty in her voice when she defended him. He'll make trouble, Daniel said finally. Man like that doesn't forget being embarrassed. Might be safer if you... If I what? Run away? Hide? Clara stood abruptly. I've done enough running. Daniel. I came west to build a life, and that's what I intend to do. Henry Callahan doesn't scare me. But Daniel saw the way her hands still trembled. heard the forced bravery in her voice. "You could still go to town, find work, start fresh. I'd help." "Is that what you want?" Clara asked quietly. "For me to leave?" The question hung between them like a physical thing. Daniel stood slowly, choosing his words with care. "What I want doesn't matter. This is about what's best for you." "That's not an answer." He looked at her then, really looked, saw the strength beneath the fear, the determination that had driven her across a continent, the grace that remained unbroken despite everything she'd endured. Saw, too, the vulnerability in her eyes, the unspoken question there. "No," he said roughly. "I don't want you to leave, but I've got no right to ask you to stay. You deserve better than—" He gestured at the cabin, the isolated land, himself. "Better than a warm home and an honest man." Clara stepped closer. "Better than someone who sees me as a person, not property. Who risked Henry Callahan's anger to protect me." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Tell me, Daniel, where exactly would I find better than that?" He had no answer, could only stand there, heart hammering, as she reached up to touch his face. Her fingers were gentle against his weathered cheek. "I choose to stay," she said simply. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I want to be. With you, if you'll have me." "Clara." His voice broke on her name. "People will talk. Your reputation will be what I make of it." She finished. "I'm done living by other people's rules. Daniel, done letting others decide my worth. The only opinion that matters to me is yours." He caught her hand, holding it against his face. "You know my opinion. Known it since that first night. I reckon just been too much a coward to say it." "Then say it now," she challenged, green eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you," Daniel said, the words rough but true. "Lord help me, I've loved you since you stood on my doorstep looking like a half-drowned angel. Loved you more each day, watching you refuse to break, refuse to give up. I've got nothing to offer but hard work and uncertain seasons, but if you'll have me, Clara Whitmore, I'll spend my life trying to be the man you deserve." She was crying now, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "You already are," she whispered, and raised up on her toes to kiss him. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, tasting of new beginnings and promises unspoken. When they parted, Daniel rested his forehead against hers, marveling at the gift of her trust. "We'll face whatever comes," he said. "Together." "Together," Clara agreed, and sealed the promise with another kiss. From the distant hill, hidden among the pines, Henry Callahan watched through field glasses. His face twisted with rage as he saw the embrace, saw his discarded bride choosing a penniless cowboy over all he could offer. "This isn't over," he muttered to his companion. "Not by a long shot." But in the cabin clearing, Daniel and Clara were aware only of each other, of the future stretching before them bright with possibility. They'd found something worth fighting for in each other, a love born of storm and strengthened by trial. And that, they would discover, was stronger than any threat Henry Callahan could muster. Word spread through the valley like wildfire after a dry summer. By the week's end, everyone from Milltown to the far ranches knew about the mail-order bride living in Daniel Brooks' cabin. The gossip varied depending on who told it. Some said Clara was a fallen woman taking advantage of a lonely cowboy. Others that Daniel had stolen another man's bride. Still others that it was a love match pure and simple. Daniel felt the weight of stares when he went to town for supplies. Conversations stopped when he entered Murphy's general store, only to resume in hushed whispers as he gathered flour and coffee. "Heard you got yourself some company out at your place," Jim Murphy said carefully as he tallied the purchases. "Miss Whitmore's staying with me for now," Daniel replied evenly, "until she decides on her plans." "Uh-huh." Murphy's expression was neutral, but his wife, Martha, sorting fabric nearby, sniffed loudly in disapproval. Outside, Daniel loaded his wagon, trying to ignore the cluster of women who'd gathered across the street, heads together like hens pecking at grain. He recognized Mrs. Aldrich, the banker's wife, and Mrs. Dawson from the hotel. Their expressions left no doubt about their topic of conversation. Daniel Brooks, a commanding voice called out. He turned to see Reverend Samuel Hartley approaching, black coat flapping like crow's wings. Reverend, Daniel acknowledged warily. I've heard disturbing news, the minister said without preamble. About you and the young woman from Philadelphia. What you've heard is likely half truth and half imagination, Daniel said, continuing to load supplies. Then perhaps you'll clarify the situation for me. Hartley's thin face was stern. Is there or is there not an unmarried woman residing in your home? Daniel straightened, meeting the Reverend's gaze directly. Miss Whitmore sought shelter during the storm. I gave it. She's staying until she chooses to leave. And you see nothing improper in this arrangement. I see nothing improper in basic human decency. Reverend, would you have had me turn her away to freeze? Hartley's mouth tightened. Of course not. But the storm has passed, and yet she remains. The appearance of impropriety is other people's problem, not mine. Daniel finished. Good day. Reverend. He climbed onto the wagon seat, but Hartley caught the horse's bridle. Think of the young woman's reputation, if not your own. The minister urged. What future can she have here if she's seen as compromised? Maybe folks should mind their own business instead of inventing sins where there are none, Daniel suggested, his patience wearing thin. I'm trying to help. Daniel, there are proprieties to consider. If you care for this young woman, I do, Daniel said simply. More than you know. Then marry her, Hartley said. Make it proper. I'll perform the ceremony myself. Today, if needed. Save both your reputations. Daniel looked down at the earnest minister. When Miss Whitmore and I marry, if we marry, it'll be because we choose it, not because gossips forced our hand. Now let go of my horse. He drove home troubled, knowing the Reverend meant well, but resenting the pressure all the same. Clara had been through enough without adding the weight of small-town judgment. He found her in the garden plot beside the cabin, turning soil despite the lingering cold. She'd found his mother's old sunbonnet and wore it pushed back, her face flushed with exertion. You're back early, she said, smiling. Then, seeing his expression, what happened? Daniel told her about the store, the whispers, Reverend Hartley's visit. Clara listened, her face growing still. I'm ruining your reputation, she said quietly when he finished. Don't care about my reputation. You should. This is your home, your community. These people's opinions matter, whether you admit it or not. She pulled off the bonnet, twisting it in her hands. Maybe I should go. Find lodging in town. No. Daniel caught her hands. Don't let them drive you away. Not when... He struggled for words. Not when we're just beginning to figure out what this is between us. Clara searched his face. What is this between us? Daniel? He pulled her closer, uncaring if anyone was watching. It's me waking up happy because I know you'll be there. It's you making this empty cabin feel like a home. It's... He cupped her face gently. It's love. Clara. At least on my part. On both parts, she whispered, leaning into his touch. But love might not be enough if the whole town turns against us. You need these people for supplies, for help during roundup, for selling your cattle. I need you more, Daniel said fiercely. They were interrupted by the sound of another wagon approaching. Doctor, Morrison's buggy came into view, his wife Ellen beside him on the seat. Daniel tensed, expecting more lectures, but the doctor's weathered face was kind as he climbed down. Afternoon, Dan, Miss Whitmore. He tipped his hat. Wife and I thought we'd pay a social call, if you don't mind. Ellen Morrison, pale but smiling, accepted her husband's help down. I've been eager to meet you, Miss Whitmore. It's not often we get new ladies in the valley. Clara glanced at Daniel, surprised, then stepped forward. Please call me Clara. Would you like to come inside? I've just made fresh coffee. As the women went into the cabin, Doctor, Morrison lingered with Daniel. Tom Garrett told me what Callahan did. The doctor said quietly, leaving that girl in a storm. Criminal, if you ask me. Thought everyone would side with Callahan. Daniel admitted. He's got money, influence. He's also got a reputation for cruelty that money can't quite cover. Morrison replied, Not everyone in town's against you. Dan, some of us remember what it's like to be young and in love. Inside, they found the women chatting like old friends. Ellen Morrison, despite her frail health, had a warm manner that put Clara at ease. I've been telling Clara about the Ladies' Aid Society. Ellen said, We meet Thursdays to quilt and organize charity work. I think she'd be a wonderful addition. That's kind, but... Clara hesitated. Given the circumstances, I'm not sure I'd be welcome. Nonsense, Ellen said firmly. You let me handle the busybodies. A few of them need reminding about Christian charity anyway. They stayed an hour, the conversation easy and pleasant. As they prepared to leave, Ellen pressed a small package into Clara's hands. Flower seeds, she explained. From my garden. This country needs all the beauty it can get. After they left, Clara stood holding the packet, tears threatening. They were so kind. Not everyone's a narrow-minded gossip, Daniel said, pulling her into his arms. There's good people here too. You'll see. Over the following days, they had other visitors. Tom Garrett stopped by with his wife Agnes, a practical woman who took one look at Clara and declared, About time Daniel found himself a sensible woman. The Hendersons from the neighboring ranch brought preserves and an invitation to their daughter's wedding. Even Sheriff Thompson paid a social call, bringing his wife and a warning that Callahan had been making noise in town. But for every kind gesture, there were cold shoulders in town, whispered conversations that stopped when Clara appeared, and pointed looks from those who considered themselves guardians of propriety. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Clara had gone to town alone, insisting she needed to face the gossips herself. Daniel had reluctantly agreed, though worry gnawed at him all morning. She returned earlier than expected, her face pale and set. Without a word, she went inside and began packing her few belongings. Clara, what happened? Daniel followed her. Alarmed, Mrs. Aldrich cornered me outside the mercantile, Clara said, her voice too calm. She had quite a lot to say about women of loose morals corrupting decent men. Suggested I might find work at the Crimson Palace if I was determined to live in sin. The Crimson Palace was Milltown's most notorious saloon and brothel. Daniel's vision went red. She had no right. Then Mr. Callahan appeared. Clara's hands shook as she folded her spare dress. He offered to set me up in town. Said since I'd clearly chosen to be a kept woman, I might as well be kept by someone who could afford it. I'll kill him, Daniel said flatly. No. Clara whirled to face him. Don't you see? This is what I've brought to your life. Scandal and conflict and ugly rumors. You don't deserve this. What I don't deserve is you, Daniel said, catching her hands. But somehow you're here anyway. Don't let them win. Clara, don't let their small minds and smaller hearts drive away what we have. What do we have? Clara cried. A love that makes us outcasts. A future where you lose business because of me? Where any children we might have are called bastards because people will always wonder if we were together before marriage. Daniel pulled her against him, holding tight when she struggled. We have each other. We have this land. We have friends who see us for who we are. The rest will come around or they won't. But either way, we'll survive it. You're so sure, she whispered against his chest. I'm sure of you, he said simply. Sure of us. The rest is just noise. Clara clung to him then, crying out her frustration and hurt. When her tears subsided, she looked up at him with red-rimmed but determined eyes. All right, she said. We face them together. But Daniel, we need to do something about our situation. Not because of the gossips, but because I want to be your wife in truth, not just in my heart. Daniel's breath caught. Clara Whitmore, are you proposing to me? Despite everything, she laughed. I suppose I am, though it's terribly improper for a woman to... He silenced her with a kiss, pouring all his love and promise into the connection. When they parted, both were breathless. Yes, he said. To whatever you're asking. Yes, we'll marry tomorrow if you want, or next month, or next year. Whenever you're ready. However you want it. Just say you'll be my wife. I'll be your wife, Clara whispered, and kissed him again. Outside, thunder rumbled across the valley, promising another storm. But inside the cabin, Daniel and Clara held each other and made plans, building their future on a foundation of love strong enough to weather any tempest, natural or man-made. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by young Tommy Patterson, who worked odd jobs around town. Daniel was mending fence when the boy rode up, and Clara was hanging the wash on the line. "Letter for Miss Whitmore." Tommy called out, waving an envelope. "Came on yesterday's stage." Clara's face lit up. "From Philadelphia?" "No, ma'am. Local postmark." The light dimmed in her eyes as she took the envelope. Daniel watched her turn it over, examining the unfamiliar handwriting. Tommy rode off with a coin for his trouble, and Clara slowly opened the letter. As she read, her face went white. "What is it?" Daniel abandoned the fence, alarmed by her expression. Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. He recognized neither the handwriting nor the signature, but the content made his blood boil. "Dearest sister," it read, "I write with terrible news. Father is taken gravely ill, and the doctors fear he hasn't long. He calls for you constantly in his delirium. Mother begs you to return at once. We've scraped together funds for your passage. Mr. Jameson at the bank has the ticket waiting. Please hurry. Your loving brother, William." "I don't have a brother," Clara said faintly. "My father died 2 years ago. This is Callahan," Daniel finished grimly. "Has to be, trying to trick you into leaving." Clara sank onto the porch step. "He hired someone to write this, to prey on my grief." Her voice hardened. "What kind of man does such a thing?" "The desperate kind," Daniel said, sitting beside her. "He can't stand that you chose me over him. This is his way of trying to get you alone, away from protection." "Should we tell Sheriff Thompson?" Daniel considered. "What would we tell him? That we got a letter? No law against that, even if we know it's false." They spent the day wary, expecting more tricks. Daniel kept his rifle close while working, and Clara stayed near the cabin, but nothing else came until the following morning, when Dr. Morrison appeared with urgent news. Callahan's been spreading word that Clara's family is desperate for her return. The doctor reported, "Says he's generously arranged passage out of Christian charity. Half the town thinks he's a saint for helping the woman who spurned him, while the other half still thinks I'm a Jezebel." Clara said bitterly. "What's his game?" Daniel asked. Morrison's face was grim. "Best I can figure, he's setting it up so when you don't put Clara on that stage, he can claim you're holding her against her will, paint himself as the hero trying to reunite a family." "That's insane," Clara protested. "That's Callahan." The doctor corrected. "Dan, you need to be careful. He's got Judge Brennan's ear, and the judge owes him money. If Callahan pushes this story hard enough—" He didn't need to finish. A judge's order could force Clara to leave, could even put Daniel in jail for interfering. "We'll marry immediately." Daniel decided, a husband's rights. Won't matter if the judge decides the marriage was coerced. Morrison interrupted. Callahan's thought this through. They spent a sleepless night planning. By morning, they'd decided Clara should go to town, publicly refuse the ticket, and denounce the letter as a forgery. It would rob Callahan of his narrative. But when they arrived at the bank, they found Callahan himself waiting with Judge Brennan and several prominent townspeople. "Miss Whitmore." Callahan's voice rang with false concern. "Thank God you've come. Your family situation is dire indeed." "I have no family," Clara stated clearly. "My parents are dead, and I have no siblings. That letter is a lie." Callahan's eyes widened in theatrical shock. "My dear girl, grief has clearly affected your mind. Perhaps the isolation at Brooks' cabin." "My mind is perfectly clear," Clara interrupted. "As is your intention. You're trying to force me to leave through deception." Judge Brennan, a thin man with shrewd eyes, studied her. "These are serious accusations. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Callahan has shown me the telegraph from your family." "What telegraph?" Daniel demanded. "Let's see it." Callahan produced a paper with a flourish. Daniel snatched it, reading aloud. Sister desperately needed. Father dying. Come at once. William Whitmore. I have no brother named William. Clara said firmly. This is fabrication. Prove it, Callahan challenged. And Daniel saw the trap. How could Clara prove she didn't have a brother? How could she prove her father was already dead without documents she didn't possess? The burden of proof isn't on Miss Whitmore. A new voice interjected. Reverend Hartley stepped forward, surprising everyone. It's on the person making the claim. Mr. Callahan, can you prove this telegraph is genuine? Where did it originate? Who paid for it? Callahan's face flushed. The family's privacy is less important than the truth. Hartley continued. I may have had concerns about propriety, but I won't stand by while someone uses lies to manipulate a young woman. How dare you? Callahan began. But Sheriff Thompson arrived then, badge glinting in the morning sun. Interesting thing, the sheriff said conversationally. I sent a wire to Philadelphia yesterday, to the authorities there. Asked about the Whitmore family. He pulled out his own paper. City records show George Whitmore died in March of 1887. His wife Margaret followed 6 months later. They had one child, a daughter named Clara. No sons. The crowd murmured. Judge Brennan's expression soured as he looked at Callahan. Henry, the judge said slowly, if you've wasted my time with false claims. I was deceived, Callahan protested. Someone took advantage of my generous nature. Your generous nature? Clara stepped forward, fury giving her courage. You left me to die in a blizzard. You've spread lies about my character. You've tried to trick me into leaving the man I love. Where exactly is this generosity you speak of? You chose this. Callahan snarled, mask finally slipping. Chose to live in sin with a nobody instead of being my wife. You made your bed. Daniel moved, but Sheriff Thompson was faster, stepping between the two men. That's enough. Henry, I think you should leave. This isn't over. Callahan pointed at Clara. You think you've won? I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. No decent person in this valley will. Will what? Ellen Morrison emerged from the gathering crowd, supported by her husband but standing straight. Won't associate with a brave young woman who refused to be bullied. Won't do business with Daniel Brooks, one of the most honest men in the territory. She looked around at the assembled townspeople. If that's the kind of community we are, then shame on us all. Agnes Garrett joined her. I agree. This harassment has gone on long enough. One by one, others stepped forward. The Henderson... Jim Murphy, despite his wife's glare. Even Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to show that Callahan didn't speak for the whole town. The rancher's face went from red to purple. Without another word, he stormed off. Judge Brennan hurrying after him with apologies no one wanted to hear. Sheriff Thompson turned to Daniel and Clara. I'll keep an eye on him, but you two should still be careful. A man like Callahan doesn't give up easy. Neither do we, Clara said, taking Daniel's hand. As the crowd dispersed, Reverend Hartley approached them. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology. I let concern for propriety blind me to the real impropriety happening here. He paused. If you do decide to marry, I'd be honored to perform the ceremony on your timing, not anyone else's. That evening, back at the cabin, Clara and Daniel sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. He'll try again, Clara said quietly. Probably, Daniel agreed. But did you see? Not everyone believed him. You've got supporters now, friends. We have friends, Clara corrected. Thanks to you. Thanks to your courage, Daniel countered, standing up to him like that, in front of everyone. You were magnificent. Clara leaned against his shoulder. I was terrified. But then I looked at you, and I knew I could do it. That's what you give me, Daniel. Strength I didn't know I had. You always had it, he said, kissing the top of her head. I just gave you reason to use it. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear. Whatever Callahan tried next, they'd face it together. The forged letter had backfired, revealing both his desperation and the support they hadn't known they had. "Daniel," Clara said suddenly, "I think I'd like to marry you sooner rather than later. Not because of Callahan or the gossips, but because I'm tired of wasting time. We've found something precious here. I want to celebrate it, not hide it." Daniel turned her to face him, seeing his own joy reflected in her eyes. "Name the day." 2 weeks, she suggested. "That gives us time to do it properly. Invite the people who've stood by us." 2 weeks, Daniel agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of victory and new beginnings. In town, Henry Callahan sat in his study, drinking whiskey and plotting. The forged letter had failed. But he wasn't finished, not by a long shot. If he couldn't have Clara Whitmore, he'd make sure Daniel Brooks couldn't either. One way or another, the morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline Montana sky that made the mountains look close enough to touch. Daniel stood on his porch, dressed in his best shirt, the one Clara had mended with tiny, perfect stitches, and watched the sun paint the valley gold. "Nervous?" Tom Garrett asked, approaching with a grin. The older rancher had arrived early to help with preparations. "Terrified," Daniel admitted. "Keep thinking I'll wake up and find it was all a dream, that she never knocked on my door that night." "Well, if it's a dream, we're all sharing it," Tom said, gesturing to the yard where neighbors were already arriving to set up for the outdoor ceremony. "Haven't seen folks pull together like this in years." It was true. Despite the gossips and Callahan's attempts to poison the well, enough good people had rallied around them. Agnes Garrett and Ellen Morrison had organized the women to bring food. The Henderson boys were stringing lanterns between the trees. Even gruff Jim Murphy had donated fabric for decorations, muttering something about good for business when his wife wasn't listening. Inside the cabin, Clara sat before the small mirror as Ellen Morrison fixed wildflowers into her hair. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that Agnes had altered to fit. Not the elaborate gown she might have dreamed of as a girl in Philadelphia, but somehow more perfect for it. "You look beautiful," Ellen said softly. "Daniel won't be able to speak when he sees you. He gets tongue-tied anyway." Clara laughed, though her hands trembled slightly. "I still can't believe this is happening. 3 weeks ago, I was sure I'd freeze to death in that storm. Now you're marrying a good man who adores you," Agnes finished, bustling in with a bouquet of prairie roses and wild daisies. "Life has a way of surprising us." Clara touched the simple gold band on her right hand, Daniel's mother's ring, which he'd given her the night before. "I want her to be part of tomorrow," he'd said simply. "She would have loved you." A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Ladies, the Reverend's ready when you are." Clara rose, smoothing her skirt. Through the window, she could see guests gathering, not the whole town, but enough, the people who mattered, the ones who'd chosen kindness over judgment. "Wait," Ellen said suddenly, pulling a small wrapped package from her basket. "I nearly forgot. This came for you this morning." Clara unwrapped it carefully, gasping at the contents. A delicate lace handkerchief, clearly old and precious. With a note, "For your wedding day. Every bride needs something old and something borrowed. Return it when you can. Martha Murphy." "Jim's wife?" Clara said, astonished. Martha Murphy had been among the coldest toward her in town. "People can surprise you," Agnes said with a knowing smile. "Now come on, your cowboy's waiting." The ceremony was held beneath the large cottonwood tree beside the cabin, its leaves rustling like whispered blessings. Daniel waited there with Reverend Hartley, his face lighting up when he saw Clara approach on Tom Garrett's offered arm. She was radiant in the morning light, wild flowers bright against her dark hair, carrying herself with the quiet grace that had first caught his heart. When their eyes met, the rest of the world fell away. "Who gives this woman to be married?" Reverend Hartley asked. "She gives herself," Tom answered with a grin. "But I'm honored to walk her there." It was perfect, Clara choosing her own path, just as she'd chosen Daniel despite everything. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional but made new by the depth of feeling behind them. When Daniel promised to love, honor, and cherish, his voice rough with emotion. Clara saw several women dab at their eyes. When Clara vowed to stand by him through whatever came, her voice clear and certain. Even some of the men cleared their throats suspiciously. The ring? Hartley prompted. Daniel produced a simple gold band, not fancy, but solid and true. "This was my mother's wedding ring," he said loud enough for all to hear. She wore it through 40 years of marriage, through good times and lean, through joy and sorrow. She told me once that love wasn't about the easy days. It was about choosing each other, especially on the hard ones. He slipped the ring onto Clara's finger. "I choose you, Clara, today and always." Clara's eyes shimmered with tears. "And I choose you, Daniel Brooks. Not because I had to, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because my heart knew from that first night that it had found its home. Then, by the power vested in me," Hartley said, smiling broadly, "I pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Brooks, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender, a promise sealed before friends and beneath the endless Montana sky. Cheers erupted, and someone, probably one of the Henderson boys, fired a celebratory shot into the air. The celebration that followed was unlike any Clara had imagined in her Philadelphia days. No ballroom, no orchestra, no 7-course meal. Instead, there were tables made of planks and sawhorses groaning under the weight of shared food. Sam Henderson played his fiddle while couples danced on the packed earth. Children ran between the adults, stealing cookies and playing tag. "Not quite the society wedding you might have dreamed of," Daniel said as they took a break from dancing, watching their guests enjoy themselves. "It's better," Clara said firmly. "Every person here chose to come, chose to celebrate with us despite the talk. That means more than 100 society weddings." "Doctor," Morrison approached with glasses of punch. "To the new Mr. and Mrs. Brooks," he toasted. "May your troubles be few and your joys many." As the afternoon wore on, Clara noticed a rider on the ridge above the valley, sitting motionless on his horse, even at a distance. She recognized Henry Callahan's bulky silhouette. "He's watching," she told Daniel quietly. Daniel followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "Let him. He can see what he threw away, not just you, but the chance to be part of something good." Sheriff Thompson had noticed too, moving casually to where his horse was tied, rifle within reach. But Callahan just sat there, a dark specter at the edge of their joy, before finally turning and riding away. As evening approached and guests began to leave, each offering congratulations and promises to help with the upcoming harvest, Clara felt a deep satisfaction. They'd done it, gotten married on their own terms, surrounded by people who wished them well. "Happy?" Daniel asked as they stood together, waving goodbye to the Garretts. "Happier than I knew was possible," Clara admitted, "though I do wonder what Callahan will try next. He won't just give up." "Probably not," Daniel agreed. "But that's tomorrow's worry. Today, Mrs. Brooks, you're my wife, and nothing he does can change that." The last guests departed as sunset painted the mountains purple and gold. Clara and Daniel stood together on their porch now, of their home, watching the stars emerge. "No regrets?" Daniel asked. "You could have had a very different life. Easier." "Certainly." Clara turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "I could have had Henry Callahan's big house and his money and his cold heart. I could have stayed in Philadelphia and slowly starved, body and soul. Instead, I have you, this land, these friends, this life we're building together." She smiled. "I have no regrets, Daniel, only gratitude." He kissed her then, long and deep, and carried her over the threshold of their cabin as tradition demanded. Inside, the space that had once echoed with his loneliness now held warmth and promise and the beginning of their shared story. Outside, the night deepened, stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf called to its mate, and another answered. a wild song of belonging that echoed across the valley. In the cabin, by the light of the fire Daniel had taught her to tend, Clara carefully folded her wedding dress and tucked Martha Murphy's handkerchief inside. Tomorrow she would return it with thanks, another small bridge built in their community. Tomorrow they would begin the daily work of marriage, of building a life together against whatever odds came their way. But tonight, they had each other and the promise of all the tomorrows to come. And that, Clara thought as Daniel drew her close, was wealth beyond measure. The wedding day that had begun with sunrise and Clara's nervous anticipation ended with moonlight and the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, in Daniel's arms, in their home, in this life they'd chosen despite every obstacle. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together. They'd already proven that love could bloom in the most unlikely ground, could survive blizzards and gossip and a rich man's spite. And now, as Clara Brooks, she was ready to help that love grow into something that would last a lifetime. 5 years had passed since that winter storm brought Clara to Daniel's door. The cabin had grown. A second room added when their daughter Emma arrived, screaming and perfect, on a crisp autumn morning. Now, as Clara stood at the window watching 4-year-old Emma chase chickens while 2-year-old James toddled after her, she marveled at how much life could change. "Mama, look," Emma called, holding up a brown egg triumphantly. "The red hen laid it just for me." "That's wonderful. Sweetheart, bring it in carefully." The cabin that had once seemed small for two now burst with life. Children's drawings decorated the walls. A rag doll rested on the rocking chair Daniel had made while Clara was carrying Emma. Tiny, muddy boot prints tracked across the floor she'd just swept. Daniel came in from the barn. James perched on his shoulders. "Someone wants his mama," he said, setting the boy down. James immediately wrapped himself around Clara's skirts. "The Hendersons are coming for supper, remember?" Clara said, scooping up her son. "Sarah wants to discuss the new schoolhouse." The community had grown too. More families had settled in the valley, drawn by good land and the promise of the coming railroad. There was talk of building a proper school, and Clara had been asked to help organize it. "Never thought I'd see the day when this valley had enough children for a school," Daniel said, washing his hands at the basin. "Remember when it was just us and the wind?" "I remember," Clara said softly. Those early days seemed like another lifetime. The desperate woman who'd stumbled through a blizzard. The lonely cowboy who'd opened his door to a stranger. A knock interrupted her memories. Daniel opened the door to find Tom Garrett, his weathered face serious. "Dan, Clara, thought you should know. Henry Callahan's back." The name sent a chill through the warm kitchen. Callahan had left the valley 3 years ago after a failed business venture, selling his ranch to Eastern investors. Most had assumed he was gone for good. "What's he want?" Daniel asked, his hand instinctively moving to where his rifle rested. "Can't say for certain, but he's been asking about you two in town, and about your land." After Tom left, Clara and Daniel exchanged worried looks over their children's heads. They'd built something beautiful here, a real home, a growing family, a place in the community. The thought of Callahan threatening that made Clara's stomach clench, but when Callahan finally appeared 2 days later, he wasn't the man they remembered. His bulk had turned to fat. His expensive clothes showed wear, and his eyes held the desperate look of a man who'd lost more than money. "Brooks," he said, not dismounting from his tired-looking horse. "Mrs. Brooks." "Callahan," Daniel acknowledged warily. "State your business. I've come to make you an offer." Callahan's voice lacked its old bluster. "I need to buy land, and yours is available." "It's not for sale," Daniel said flatly. "Everything's for sale at the right price." Callahan named a figure that made Clara gasp. More money than they'd see in 10 years. "You heard my husband," Clara said, stepping beside Daniel. "Our home is not for sale." Callahan's face twisted. "You could buy a dozen homes with what I'm offering. Think of your children." "I am thinking of them," Clara interrupted. "This is their home, This is where they'll learn to ride and plant gardens and understand what it means to work land your own hands have tended. No amount of money can buy that." "You're fools," Callahan said, but the words lacked heat. He looked older, defeated. "I need this land. The investors. I promised them I could buy it back. Expand the operation." "Should have thought of that before you sold," Daniel said without sympathy. Callahan stared at them for a long moment. "I could have had you," he said to Clara. "Could have given you everything." "You gave me everything," Clara replied quietly. "By leaving me in that storm, you gave me the chance to find my real life. So thank you, Mr. Callahan. Thank you for showing me who you really were before it was too late." Something shifted in Callahan's face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Without another word, he turned his horse and rode away. They never saw him again. That evening, with the Hendersons visiting and the house full of laughter and planning for the new school, Clara found a moment to step outside. The summer evening was warm, fireflies dancing in the growing dusk. Daniel joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You all right?" "More than all right," Clara said. "Seeing him again, I thought it would bring back the fear, the anger, but all I felt was pity and gratitude." Gratitude? If he'd been kind that day, if he'd accepted me, I'd be living in his big house, married to a man who saw me as property. I'd never have known this. She gestured to the cabin behind them, where their children's laughter mixed with their friends' voices. "I'd never have known you." Daniel pulled her closer. "His loss, my gain." "Our gain," Clara corrected. They stood together, watching the stars emerge. Inside, Emma was regaling the Hendersons with a dramatic tale about the rooster, while James banged a spoon on the table in accompaniment. It wasn't the life Clara had imagined when she'd answered that mail-order bride advertisement so long ago. It was infinitely better. "The school committee wants me to teach once it's built," Clara said, "part-time, while the children are small." "You'd be wonderful at it," Daniel said immediately. "Though some folks might remember." "Let them remember," Clara said firmly. "Let them remember that I came here as a stranger and found a home. Let them remember that kindness matters more than gossip. Let them tell their daughters that they have choices, even when the world seems to offer none," as if summoned by their conversation. Emma burst through the door. "Mama, Papa, come see. Mrs. Henderson is going to teach me to braid hair." They followed their daughter inside, back to the warmth and chaos of their full life. The cabin that had once sheltered a desperate woman from a killing storm now sheltered a family built on love, trust, and the kind of courage that comes from choosing your own path. Later, after the Hendersons had gone and the children were asleep, Clara and Daniel sat on the porch as they had that first morning after the storm. The valley spread before them, silver under moonlight, full of promise. "No regrets?" Daniel asked, echoing his question from their wedding day. Clara thought of the woman she'd been, frightened, alone, at the mercy of other people's decisions. Then she looked at her husband, thought of their children sleeping safe inside, of the friends who'd become family, of the teaching position waiting for her, of the life they'd built from nothing but determination and love. "No regrets," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Only joy." Daniel raised her hand to his lips, kissing the worn gold band that had been his mother's. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For knocking on my door that night, for staying, for choosing us." Clara smiled, leaning into his warmth. "Thank you for opening it, for seeing me as more than an inconvenience or a scandal, for giving me a chance to discover who I really was." They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and built something lasting from that chance encounter. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. It always did. The ranch needed tending. The children would wake early and hungry. The new school would need organizing. But tonight, with the vast Montana sky stretched above them and their children safe inside, Clara and Daniel Brooks had everything they needed. They had each other, They had their family, and they had the knowledge that the best things in life often came disguised as disasters. Inside the cabin, little James cried out in his sleep. Clara rose to tend to him, pressing a kiss to Daniel's weathered cheek as she passed. He caught her hand, holding it for just a moment, a small gesture that said everything words couldn't. Then she went inside to comfort their son, and Daniel remained on the porch a moment longer, listening to her soft singing through the window. He thought of that terrified, half-frozen woman who'd appeared at his door 5 years ago, and marveled at the strong, confident mother and community leader she'd become. Or maybe she'd always been that person, just waiting for the chance to show it. Either way, Daniel Brooks knew he was the luckiest man in Montana Territory. He'd opened his door to a stranger and found his soulmate. He'd offered simple kindness and received a lifetime of love in return. As Clara's lullaby drifted through the night air, Daniel finally went inside to join his family. The cabin door closed softly behind him, shutting out the vast darkness and keeping in the light, just as it had on that fateful winter night when two lonely souls had found each other in the storm. Thank you for listening to this story from the American frontier. If you're enjoying tales from the Wild West, we'd love to hear where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of love, courage, and adventure from America's untamed past. Share your thoughts about Clara and Daniel's journey in the comments. Until next time, partners.